The Ten Commandments actually made it through the apostasy. So why did Jesus and God have to come and restore something if the commandments were still there? Because what had been lost is the plan of salvation, the reasons, the perspective, the big picture. So they came not to restore rules, they came to restore the reason for the rules. That's what had been forgotten.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to For All the Saints with me, Ben. And I'm really excited about the special guest that I have on the podcast today. It's Brother Brad Wilcox. Brother Wilcox, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Ben, thank you for doing this show. I know it's reaching a lot of people and doing a lot of good.
Thank you. And I think it's nice coming from the UK as well. It's a bit of a different accent than many people are used to, and so hopefully that's a good thing. But
that is a very good thing. Everybody will want to listen just because they'll think that they're talking to Harry Potter.
We've just been watching Harry Potter, actually. It's something we do all the time. I wanted to start by asking you some sort of logistical, more practical questions. Firstly, what's it like serving? You've been serving in the Young Men's General Presidency for a while. What is that experience like?
It has been wonderful. It has given us a chance to work very closely with the youth, of course, but also with the Young Women Presidency. The Young Men Presidency, the Young Women Presidency have worked closer together in the last few years than really ever before in history. Because for many, many years, the church had the Young Men Presidency working with scouting. And now the Children and Youth Program is for both the boys and the girls. And so we meet at least weekly once with the Young Women Presidency all the time. It's also been a blessing to be working so closely with the church leaders. Not many people have the chance to have a front row seat to watch what's happening behind the scenes. And it has been such a joy to be able to testify to young people that the brethren and the sisters who lead this church are very sincere. They live a single standard. They don't live one way when they're on the camera for general conference and another way when they're backstage screaming at people because they didn't get something right. I have never been disappointed. There is always a consistent goodness that just radiates from these leaders. And I have watched them grapple with difficult situations, difficult issues, and they have always impressed me with the humility they have, the inspiration that they receive, the confidence that they have. And I stand amazed at the depth of their Christ-like lives. And when they stand as witnesses of Christ, I've seen that witness in public and in private. And it has just been a beautiful testimony builder to me to see them function in such positive and effective and just incredible ways. They have always had my love and my sustaining vote, but being able to watch them has just made me lift my arm just a little bit higher every time.
For those of us who sort of, what we see of the quorum of the 12 apostles in the First Presidency is mainly at conference and what's on church news. Have you had any specific experiences that we sort of wouldn't be as party to, where you've learned something from them behind this?
When we were called in 2020, so the whole world had shut down. In fact, the conference where we were sustained we were told, just bring your immediate family. Then we were told, no, you can't bring your family, just your spouse. And then we were told, you can't bring your spouse, just yourself. And then we were told, no, you can't come. So you'll just be sustained and you'll just be in your homes. Similarly, when we were set apart on the Wednesday after General Conference, they said, you can't bring your family, just bring your spouse. And Elder Cook met us in the lobby of a very empty administration building. And he said, I don't know what's going to happen. He said, maybe we'll separate into different rooms. He said, let's just see what the First Presidency says. So when the secretary opened the door to the conference room by President Nelson's office, we were invited in, and President Nelson said, welcome. He said, I wish we could greet you. I wish we could hug you. I wish that we could shake your hands. But since we can't, feel my love. And I felt it. It just filled the whole room. And when he set us apart, he said, I think we're a small enough group, so let's just stay together. And he said, as we set you apart, he said, we don't set your wives apart in this calling, but we know how vital they are to your success. So let's just bring another chair forward and let's have you just hold hands with your wife while we set you apart. And so President Lund, Ahmed Corbett, and I got to sit holding our wives' hands as the First Presidency set us apart. Now think about that. Have I ever seen that? Ever in all my years in the church. And yet here was a prophet who is a father of 9 daughters and a prophet who values and recognizes the sisters. He is focused on making sure that their voices are heard. The sisters not only run their organizations, but they also are involved with all the executive councils of the church, the missionary council, the temple, the humanitarian aid, the priesthood and family department. These sisters sit on these councils and they meet regularly with the 12 and they are asked their opinions. It's remarkable to watch. And that is something that I have truly learned to appreciate about President Nelson and all of the brethren. You know, when he enters General Conference and everybody stands up, which I think is the coolest thing in the world today, where people show so little respect for leaders and so little respect for other people. It's just glorious to see an entire conference center stand as the prophet enters the room. But it's interesting. He greets the apostles that he passes, and then he looks up. The sisters sit right behind the pulpit, and he looks up and greets them, usually by name. And he'll smile and say hello, or he'll say, good talk yesterday, or thank you for all you do. And one conference, I was sitting next to Sister Sharon Eubank, and I just kept thinking, come on, President Nelson, one person more, just one person more, just greet me too. No, he didn't greet me, but he greeted all of the sisters, smiled and nodded at them, made eye contact before he took his seat. And I just think that's something that people don't see because his back is to the audience. But that's something that I saw from where I was sitting. And just to see the respect he shows the sisters and how sensitively he treats them, it's just remarkable.
Yeah, that's amazing. And are you meeting with the First Presidency and Apostles regularly? What's your sort of day-to-day schedule as... I know Elder Bednar, sorry to interject, but Elder Bednar put a social media post out recently, and it was very popular, and we were all talking about what an interesting insight it was as he did a day in the life of Elder Bednar, and he took us around all of his meetings. And so that comes from me wanting to ask you about that because I'm interested
Did he
in that.
take you on his exercise routine?
No, he didn't take us on that.
His exercise routine is pretty intense, and so next time he does a post, he'll have to take you exercising with him. But the Young Men Presidency does have the opportunity to meet with the First Presidency at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. But the Quorum of the 12 has a meeting every Wednesday in which we are invited to attend, sometimes in person, sometimes in via Zoom, during which they talk about issues that will have to do with the young men sometimes. And so it's a blessing to be there. It's a blessing to watch and listen to the advice that's given and the problems that are addressed. But as I said, it's fascinating because I don't know that I've ever been asked to share my opinion in that meeting. I am one of many men in the room, but President Ballard always says, Sister Corden, what do you think about this? Sister Johnson, Sister Porter, Sister Freeman, we need your input on this. And it's so beautiful to see that these sisters train with the apostles. We have the chance to meet with them, but many of the apostles will take sisters with them when they are doing their trainings. And I think it's pretty amazing to see an apostle inviting a sister to come and train with him. Similarly, just last night, I did a training with Sister Runya of the Young Women Presidency, and we stood side by side at that microphone for an hour and a half. And I just think this kind of model is something that bishops and Relief Society presidents, young women presidents can all learn from. Stake young men presidents, stake young women presidents, to be able to be working together, counseling together.
And in those councils, you, in the Young Men's Presidency and the Young Women working together, have sort of brought to... I was just watching the BYU Women's Conference where you all spoke as a Young Men's Presidency about the new For the Strength of Youth guide. And I've been excited to ask you a few questions about that. And I wonder if you could tell us, what is the story behind how that came to be?
Yeah, a lot of people were contacting us, sending some letters. Steve Lund had been on a committee for several years in which they'd been talking to missionaries about how they had used the guide when they were growing up. They talked to missionaries from all over the world at the MTC to try to get a general idea of how the guide was used and if young people were valuing it. So there was a lot of footwork that was done, but a lot of questions were coming in saying the guide doesn't say anything about energy drinks. It doesn't say anything about vaping. It doesn't say anything about sexting. And we need to make sure that these standards are covered in the guide. Well, President Uchtdorf was very wise when he said, Mosiah 4:29 through 30 says the ways to sin are numberless. And Elder Uchtdorf said, what are we going to do? Republish a guide every month based on whatever the newest thing is that comes along? He said, it's time to lift the youth up to the principles. Instead of listing rules and drawing lines, especially in an international church, he said we need to be teaching principles. It's time for them to come to a higher, a holier way of making choices. So we started working together in that direction. And And you have to realize, we grew up with lines like, don't see R-rated movies. Well, that's a nice line, but when you're dealing with an international church, the rating system is different all over the world. And we also have to face the fact that the rating system has slipped. It has failed us in the United States because now what used to be an R rating, now you see the same material in PG movies, and the ratings have slipped. And so that line just is not the line that youth can count on all over the world. So what's the principle that we should be teaching? In the For the Strength of Youth guide, it says, seek that which uplifts, inspires, and invites the Spirit. As you make choices about what to watch, read, listen to, or participate in, think about how it makes you feel. Does it invite good thoughts? Stay away from anything that mocks sacred things or that is immoral. Don't participate in anything that dulls your judgment or sensitivity to the Spirit, such as violence, alcohol, or harmful drugs. Have the courage to turn off a video or game, walk out of a movie or a dance, change your music, turn away from anything that is not consistent with the Spirit. Now, if youth are honest with themselves, that covers it. That covers it right there. And for youth to still be saying, oh, but can I watch an R-rated movie? Can I watch? I mean, that covers it. It covers it beautifully. Dating is another example. When the rule we grew up with said don't date until you're 16, and some parents said right up to your birthday, your 16th birthday, you can't date. We were living in a world where everyone understood what a date was. Today, that word has taken on new meaning. And in some cultures, like India, where the church has 4 stakes, parents don't let children date until they're in their 20s. And so for the church to say you can date at age 16 was really challenging for parents who had a much different cultural view. Similarly, in many parts of Europe, as you may well know, dating means you're sleeping together. And so for the church to say don't date till you're 16 is the message we're communicating, don't sleep with anybody until you're 16? I mean, listen to how now the guide reads, and it doesn't even use the word dating. The only time you find the word in the guide is in the index, pointing you to this page. When and how should I get to know members of the opposite sex? The best way to get to know others is through genuine friendship. While you are young, build good friendships with many people. In some cultures, youth get to know members of the opposite sex through wholesome group activities. For your emotional and spiritual development and safety, one-on-one activities should be postponed until you are mature. Age 16 is a good guideline. Counsel with your parents and leaders. Save exclusive relationships for when you are older. Spend time with those who help you keep your commitments to Jesus Christ. Now, any youth who's being honest with himself or herself says that covers it.
Mm-hmm.
That covers it very clearly. And so these were the careful decisions and choices that were being made as the guide was being prepared. And yet, when the guide was introduced last year, a friend of mine had his son come home from high school and say, "Dad, I'm getting a tattoo." His dad said, "Why?" He said, "Because Elder Uchtdorf said it's okay." That when did Elder Uchtdorf say that's okay? He said it in conference. The dad said, "How do you know? You didn't even listen to conference." And the kid said, oh, well, it's all over social media. It's all over social media. Oh, the dad said, so let's listen to what people are saying on social media instead of listening to prophets. Does that make sense? And the son admitted that it didn't. So he said, listen to what Elder Uchtdorf said, and then let's talk about your tattoo. Now, what it says here in the guide and what Elder Uchtdorf quoted was, the purpose of For the Strength of Youth is not to give a yes or a no about every possible choice you might face. Instead, the Lord is inviting you to live in a higher and holier way, His way. This guide will teach you about His way. It explains truths He has revealed. Make these truths your guide for making choices, big choices. Well, the good news of that story isn't just that the kid decided not to get a tattoo. The good news of that story is that dad and son were talking. Dad didn't say, over my dead body. Dad said, let's find out what Elder Uchtdorf says about that. Let's think about this. Let's counsel together about this. And that's the miracle of the guide, is that parents and leaders are now talking to youth, and youth are talking to them, discussing how they can receive personal revelation. Another example is a sister whose daughter came home and said, I'm going to wear this dress to homecoming dance. The dress was very immodest. And instead of the mother saying, no, you are not wearing that dress, or no, you are not going to the dance, she said, why don't we pray about that? And so the young daughter prayed about it and said, Jesus says He wants me to be cute. She says, God says He doesn't care about what I wear to the homecoming dance. And it was the mother who said, why don't you ask God not what He will accept, but what He prefers? Of course, God loves you, and that love will not change, no matter what you wear. But why don't you ask Him what He prefers? And the daughter came back and said, He said He'd prefer if I didn't wear the dress, and if I wore something that would cover my shoulders and my back. See, the beauty isn't just that the girl made a good decision, but it's that the mom pointed her and guided her toward God and toward receiving personal revelation based on principles. Now, I'm sorry, but members of the church have a hard time stepping up to a higher law. I mean, we struggle with that, but Moses did too, and the people in Moses' day did too. I mean, the people in Jesus' day did too. Moses, the law of Moses was, thou shalt not kill. Jesus said, don't even be angry with your brother. So everybody said, oh, I'm glad I can kill him now. I'm sure glad I can kill him. I just can't be angry when I do it. The law of Moses said, thou shalt not commit adultery. Jesus said, don't even lust after another person. And everybody said, oh, I'm glad I can commit adultery now. It doesn't say I can't commit adultery. It doesn't say that. We don't quite remember that Jesus made it clear that He didn't come to do away with the law. He came to fulfill the law. And maybe fulfilling the law means to help us understand a higher law and the reasons. In the higher law are the reasons we live the law. Research shows that young people who leave religion are often leaving because they don't understand the why of the rules, the why of the commandments, the why of church attendance. And this is what the book gives us. This is what the guide gives us. It gives us the why. And that's in the principles that are in the guide. So, President Nelson said, we're not doing home teaching anymore. Now we're going to go to a higher and holier way. We're going to talk about ministry. Well, too many members of the church just means that now we don't have to do anything. And, boys used to grow up going home teaching with their dads, with their uncles, with their grandpas, with an older man in the ward, and they learned. They learned a lot that prepared them for missions. In today's world, I worry that maybe there are young men who are not having that experience. They're not having to go and knock on the door of somebody who really doesn't want you there. They're not having to go and set an appointment and go after they've set an appointment. They're not learning how to listen when people are talking about concerns they have. They're not learning how to encourage someone to pray, how to promise them blessings if they do pray. I mean, these are all the things that boys used to just do naturally. And now that we've stepped up to a higher and holier way, they're just not learning that. So perhaps it's time that we realize that a higher law is not an excuse to live a lower law, but a higher law is a motivation to step up, to lift our sights. We've seen a very interesting thing happening at the church schools as well, because they just redid the honor code.
Of course.
It's principle-based, like the For the Strength of Youth Guide. And yet, sure enough, you're seeing young people struggle. You've got boys and girls wearing very short shorts. You've got sleeveless tank top type things on top. And when I approach my students, they'll say, well, they changed the honor code. I said, have you read the new honor code? Changing the honor code didn't mean that they did away with the honor code. Changing the honor code means that now we are governed by principles. And I read the principles of the honor code to my classes. In the dress and grooming principles, it says, represent the Savior, the church, and the church educational system. Preserve an inspiring environment without distraction or disruption, where covenants are kept in a spirit of unity, so the Holy Ghost can teach truth. Promote modesty, cleanliness, neatness, and restraint in dress and grooming. Maintain an elevated standard distinctive to the institutions of the Church of Jesus Christ. Now, as I read those, I say, you're not seeing a list of rules there. You're seeing a list of reasons. If somebody were to interview you and say, as a student at BYU, why do you live and dress so differently than people do on other campuses? If somebody were to receive that question on a news program and they answered by saying, because I represent the Savior and I represent the church, because I want to preserve an inspiring environment without distraction or disruption, where covenants are kept in a spirit of unity, so the Holy Ghost can teach truth. Because I want to promote modesty, cleanliness, neatness, and restraint in a popular culture that has forgotten those completely. Because I want to maintain an elevated standard. Why? Because I'm better than everybody else? No, because I want to be able to lift others. I want to better serve others. Oh my gosh, that would be a news program to remember. But where did those answers come from? They came from the principles. I often tell youth, Joseph Smith did not receive a visit from God and Jesus because the apostasy had wiped out the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments actually made it through the apostasy. So why did Jesus and God have to come and restore something if the commandments were still there? Because what had been lost is the plan of salvation. The reasons, the perspective, the big picture. So they came not to restore rules. Ha, Joseph, you thought there were only 10 commandments. No, there's more. No, that wasn't the intent. They came to restore the reason for the rules. That's what had been forgotten. And that's what young people can find in the guide. People will say, Gal, why are you so perfectionistic? Your whole church is so perfectionistic. It drives everybody insane because they expect you to be perfect. So the young person says, right out of the guide, Jesus Christ will help me. Well, why do you go to church for 2 hours every Sunday? And why do you pay tithing? Good grief. Why do you pay fast offerings? Because I love God and because I love my neighbor. Why don't you get a tattoo? Everybody has a tattoo. Yes, but my body is sacred. Why don't you look at porn? Porn is just harmless adult entertainment, but I want to walk in the light. I hope young people, parents, leaders will recognize that in the higher law, we find the reasons that can keep us moving forward in our goal to reach our eternal potential.
I think there's so much to digest there, and you've opened my eyes to looking at it from a few different ways that I hadn't considered before. I mean, I spoke to a few people in preparation for this saying, I'm speaking to Brother Wilcox this Friday. Is there anything that, if you were in my shoes, what would you speak to him about? And a few people had said, well, I'd be interested to know if there were discussions about this due for the Strength of Youth Guide, and if the openness of it and the principles allowed room for youth to think, oh, well, not being honest with themselves, doing that. And I think I love the way that you express it as reasons, not rules. And I think also something that you brought up there is that I feel like parents have had this big burden on them to be the gatekeepers in a way, because everyone knows the rules and the specifics, and they have to enforce that specific thing and say, no, you can't go out like that. And that's just the rule, that's just it. You do that.
And, it's fine for families. Parents know their children. And so instead of letting the church set a rule for everyone in the world, parents can set rules. If a parent cares about a curfew, set the curfew. You have the right as a parent to set some rules in your family, but I hope that rule would be taught within the context of the principles.
Yes, that's it. They no longer have to tell them off for it in a way and feel like they're restricting their child, because Elder Uchtdorf spoke brilliantly of that in that conference where he said, I feel so bad for the youth that they constantly, I can't do this, I can't do that. Whereas the parents now can play a role of inviting rather than restricting. And as you said, why don't you come and actually read it with me, and you'll see that everything's in there. But it's
well stated.
Why?
Elder Uchtdorf, in the meeting before General Conference, the leadership meeting, he was explaining to the general authorities, he said, our youth have been known for too long by what they can and cannot do. And you know that. I mean, when you were growing up, everybody said, oh, you don't drink coffee, you don't smoke.
Especially in the UK, where they're less familiar with this. Yeah.
You can't have sex before you get married. You can't. I mean, people know our rules. Even they don't know we're Christian, but they know we don't drink coffee. And Elder Uchtdorf's words really touched me. He said, "Our youth have been known for too long by what they can and cannot do. It's time they were known because of their love of Jesus Christ and because of the reasons that they keep the rules."
I've been amazed at, I've just moved wards and areas, but in my previous ward, I was released from the eldest quorum presidency and called as a young men's advisor. And I've had some experiences in young men's in the past where it was just kind of a drag and, the group wasn't clicking and I was thinking, oh, this is really difficult. And so when I was called, I thought, oh man, the last, basing it off the last experience. And that experience serving in young men's recently was it was so enlightening for me. And it was an incredible experience. And they were such a good group. And it made me realize that the previous group were a great group as well, but I was learning something different from it. And I was just so inspired by the youth in a way that I never expected that I would be. And well, you're traveling to these huge FSY conferences, and my wife and I, we were joint assistant coordinators in our...
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad you had that chance.
Yeah, but for you traveling around many of them, what are you learning from the youth and seeing from them, especially in the aftermath of this revised guide?
FSY is reaching out and allowing God to touch hearts in dramatic and long-lasting ways. FSY has been happening internationally successfully for many, many years. But it wasn't until just these last few years that we were able to kick it off in North America as well. So this last summer, we had over 122,000 young people who experienced FSY just in North America. Worldwide, it's well over 250,000 youth who are participating with FSY. We're seeing FSY in countries where it's never been before. We saw the first FSY in Dubai, in the Middle East. We saw the first FSY in Pakistan. There were 374 young people who came to the FSY in Pakistan. And here's what's exciting. The sacrament meeting attendance in that country, where the church is very small, the sacrament meeting attendance the very next week increased by 500 people. That means these youth were coming home so energized, so excited, that not only were they were motivating their families, but they were motivating friends to be Christian friends, to be able to come to church with them. We're seeing incredible things happen. The youth are taking a little uptick, and it's been remarkable to watch. It's easy to compare to COVID and show that the youth are much better off now than they were. But we're talking about comparing 2019 before COVID to 2022 after COVID. And we're seeing the upticks. These youth are rising like a mighty wave. We're seeing more on-time ordinations for the young men. We're seeing more patriarchal blessings. We're seeing more seminary attendance. We're seeing more temple recommends being received and used by the youth. We're seeing missionary applications going up in a dramatic way. They're expecting that by the end of this year, there will be 72,000 missionaries out. We haven't seen numbers like that since President Monson lowered the age. And then the numbers were because there was a bubble that was coming through. And when the bubble was gone, the numbers kind of went down. But now we're seeing those numbers just lift and lift and lift and lift. And I'm so proud of these young people. You say you're inspired by them? I am so inspired by them because these young people are willing to walk against the current. The world is telling them that they need to leave religion. The world is telling them that religion is harmful to them. The world is telling them that the church expects too much of them. The world is telling them all kinds of lies. But these young people are willing to stand up and walk against that tide, walk against that current. And it is remarkable to see this happening literally all over the world. I was recently in South America, in Argentina, in Paraguay, in Chile. The youth filled the chapels. They were so excited to see each other because they were seeing their friends from FSY. They are so excited to be part of the church. They stood and they sang the songs they learned at FSY, and they sang them with their whole heart. I just spoke to 3,000 teenagers in the Ogden area in Utah, and I talked about how the guide can give them reasons. I gave the youth, I stood some youth up in front of me, and I gave them the same questions I just reviewed with you. And then I pointed them to the headings in the guide, which then they read in front of the group as the answer to the question. And the youth erupted in applause. 3,000 teenagers applauding for the reasons they were hearing as these young people read the headings of the FSY guide. They were applauding. These youth are just doing incredible things. We just had a baptism in our home ward in Provo of a 17-year-old young man who is here from Argentina. And he just joined the church. And it is so exciting to see him just diving in and feeling so excited about being part of this, feeling like now he is in a position to truly make a difference. He says, I was just coasting. I was just depressed. I didn't know why I didn't feel like I had any purpose in life. And now he's not coasting. Now he's going full steam ahead. And it is just so exciting to see this positive movement all across the world.
And it's really beautiful to hear that, especially in my context, where we go to, well, the UK, in the recent census, it was found that we were one of the lowest countries in the whole world now for faith and belief, and people adopting a faith or a belief in God in any regard.
And everybody's happy to let the universe control their life, as if the universe cares, as if the universe can, but they're so hesitant to let a Heavenly Father love them. They're so willing to believe in a big bang, but they're so hesitant to believe in a big brother who loved them enough to atone for them. Yeah, we see that kind of downward slide all around the world, but we see our youth stepping up. And it is, as you said, inspiring.
And I think that me and my friends got together and we did sort of a roundtable podcast episode, just discussing things that challenge us as young people in being Christian, not even being a Latter-day Saint, but more wider Christianity. And that was one from the statistics that we went over and stuff like that. We came to the conclusion that if we want to influence the world rather than being influenced by the world, there is this element of being brave enough to be open about your faith. And there was a survey that was done in America, I think, or it may have been worldwide, but 51% of young people openly said on the survey that they were Christian, but only 8% actually showed the signs of a committed Christian, and they had a criteria for that. And that really, on the one hand, I was a bit disappointed that it was such a low number that were actually living what they said they believed. But on the other hand, I thought, doesn't that give you hope for being open about your faith? You know, when I started the podcast, a few of my uni friends came and said, "Oh, I didn't know you were Christian." I love what you're doing. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I missed that opportunity, because I wrongly thought that they would think I was weird or crazy.
Yeah, I read an article recently that said we are witnessing the death of casual Christianity. And I thought that was very, it slaps you in the face. But Christianity, which has always been a growing faith, is now at a turning point. Elder Anderson spoke about that several general conferences ago. He said in the next 10 years, there will be more people leaving Christianity than entering Christianity for the first time since Christ resurrected from the tomb. But it's exciting because he says, while the world speaks less of him, we will speak more of him. And the world needs Christianity. The world needs Christ, not less, but more than ever. There's a professor at Harvard named Arthur Brooks, and he's made quite a name for himself because he's considered an expert on happiness. Why? Because he's synthesized, brought together all the research that's been done on the subject, and he's tried to say, what is common in all of this research? It's very diverse, but what is at the core? And he boils it down to 4 basic pillars of happiness. Of course, he's quick to point out that our genetics are part of our happiness, but he says the majority of our happiness is dependent on these 4 pillars. 1, family. 2, friends. 3, what he calls fulfillment, losing yourself in something that's bigger than yourself. You know, caring more about something or someone than you care about yourself. And finally, faith. What? A Harvard professor talking about faith? Yes, and he's talking about it so effectively and so persuasively that he has students filling his classes at one of the most secular universities in the world. They fill his classes, not just because he speaks of faith, he lives it. He's an active, practicing Catholic. And they just are fascinated by the research he's pointing to and the way he lives his life. And he doesn't just say, oh, faith is a choice you can make. Well, he says, no, faith is absolutely essential to your happiness. He points out that we live in a world where we see emotional and mental health issues just skyrocketing. And yet it's the same time that we notice religious attendance, religiosity declining. And he points to 2 studies, one done right at Harvard and the other done at Stanford, that don't just say that there is a correlation. They actually are pointing to causation. They say the decline in faith, the decline in religiosity, the decline in religious attendance is actually causing the crisis of mental and emotional health that we are living with in today's world. Wow, that is pretty amazing stuff. And it's worth taking a look at, and it's worth rethinking this choice to follow the crowd downhill, rather than stepping up and following prophets uphill. But our youth, our young adults, they are making that choice. We just had a conference in Salt Lake with over 20,000 young single adults. They filled the Delta Center, the big sports arena center where the professional team plays. They filled it, and they sang along with Christian artists, one who was singing, "I'm Trying to Be Like Jesus," and the entire group were all singing together, "I'm Trying to Be Like Jesus." It was electrifying. They filled the Salt Palace, which is the convention center in Salt Lake. They literally filled it. And they filled the Marriott Center, where Elder Christofferson bore his testimony to them. This huge group of young adults, I was there. I got to speak to them. I got to visit with them. And I thought the comment from one young lady was very interesting. She said, if you look on TikTok, it looks like all the young adults are leaving religion. She said, maybe the people who post on TikTok ought to come and see this.
That's so interesting. What you just said there as well. I was just listening to a podcast today that was released last night, and it was with one of the US presidential candidates, and I was just interested in listening to it. And he was saying a similar thing of, when you look at the news and you look on social media, there's this narrative of everyone's divided, and it looks as though everyone's divided. And then he said, but when you go out on the street and you speak to people and you experience these things with people, there's actually, there isn't as much division as what's uniting us and what's bringing us together. And you could have a conversation with basically anyone, and you could come away so enriched by it. And I was touched by that.
Yes, I think the same thing could be said about young people leaving the church. They leave so loudly. They leave so publicly. I don't know that there's really that many more people leaving the church today than have left the church in any era of history. Kirtland, Ohio, the overpopulation issues of the 70s, the ERA issues of the 80s, the Mark Hoffman forgeries. I mean, there's always been something that has given people an excuse to leave. But what's happening now is that they're leaving so publicly on social media that then it seems like everyone is leaving. But what we don't see is the quiet people who aren't posting on social media about their faith and about the fact that they would never leave because they're afraid of what people might say or what people might comment. And so we see the very loud exit, but we're not seeing the very quiet coming back. That's what I see when I'm out talking to them. I see the young people who are coming back. I was at an institute in West Salt Lake, and the young man who was taking me to the different classrooms where I was making an announcement to try to recruit FSY counselors, he was walking me from room to room, helping me get around the building. And I said, tell me about your experience in the church. He said, well, I left the church. He said, I left the church a little while ago. And I said, why? He says, oh, because it seemed popular on TikTok. It seemed popular on social media. So I just kind of joined the crowd and left the church and made a big deal about it on social media. And he says, then it wasn't too long before I realized I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. And now I'm making my way back. And I said, have you posted that on social media? And he said, no. He said, I haven't. And I said, well, maybe you should. I thought, isn't it interesting that young people don't hesitate for a minute to post about their faithlessness, but they are terrified in today's climate to post about their faith. And perhaps that's a place we can start.
I want from that people watching this to know that I was feeling very vulnerable about starting this podcast, because I thought, I have a lot of friends that I've sort of met during school and college, and people I work with, and what would they think of me? And how would they take to me posting constantly, watch my episode this week? And I want people watching to know that I've had nothing but the most incredible conversations with people since, and reactions. I don't think I've had a single... You get random bots on YouTube that will sometimes comment something like, oh, this was wrong or something. But from people that I know and love, and most people that I haven't met, I've had some of the most incredible reactions. And you have to do it though. You have to put yourself in the vulnerable situation, but you'll find amazing things back. And sticking on this point of conversation, what would be your message to young people, well, people in general, about finding positive role models in today's society? And I say this in mind, especially with young men, where they're sort of told there's a narrative of their masculinity as toxic, and they feel they're sort of taught to reject their masculinity, whatever you would define masculinity as. And that inevitably springs up these social media people and icons that you look up to and you follow, and there are lots of those popping up today. And I feel like there's a loss of identity, or there's a real gap for looking for positive role models. And what would your message be to young people who need those role models?
That's one of the most wonderful things to see at FSY, is the relationship between the counselors and the youth. The counselors are young single adults who are just a little bit older than the youth. And finally, those youth see positive role models. They interact for a whole week with these young adults, and they say, oh my gosh, she screams and yells at the games. My counselor lost her voice because she screams so much at the games. She eats pizza like a man. She was at the pizza party just downing it, and yet she bears testimony. She has a testimony. Then they say, oh my gosh, that counselor, that guy, he can dance like a maniac. I mean, he's out there just rocking it, but he prays. And for many of them, they see that for the first time, you can have fun and you can be spiritual. You can be religious at the same time. And those role models are making a difference for the youth. If youth will stop looking toward the world for role models, the world offers so few. We have rock musicians, we have athletes, we have politicians, we have people that are constantly living a double standard. One way in public, another way in private, and youth are forever being disappointed by the heroes of the world. And it's not that that's new. I mean, it was Newsweek magazine that did a thing many years ago that talked about the top teen idols of all history. The top teen idols. Number one was Elvis Presley, who died of a drug overdose. If he's dead, there's always those people that say, oh no, I saw him in my ward last week. You had Madonna, who is quoted as saying, I saw losing my virginity as a career move. And you have the Beatles. At one point, John Lennon said the Beatles are more popular than Jesus. And it's not the fact that he said it, it's the fact that everybody didn't even question it. I mean, the world's role models are never going to be able to hold up. But if we can turn to role models that are close at hand, not far away out in the world, but close at hand, look among the youth in your ward, in your state, and find a kid that you can look at and say, if he can do it, I can do it. Look among mission companions and say, gosh, if he can do it, I can do it. Look among young single adults who are making right choices. And then you start finding role models that, as it says in the FSY guide, they're different from the world so that they can make a difference in the world. That's what you were talking about. And I think if they look for their role models a little closer to home, a little closer to the church, then they're going to find incredible role models to follow. But if we look toward the world, I'm afraid there aren't too many role models in the great and spacious building. The role models they're going to find are the ones that are along the rod, the ones who have knelt at the tree and partaken of the fruit. Those are the role models that they will find. As far as young men, Richard Reeves is an incredible author. He's from England, by the way. Mm-hmm. And he has produced a best-selling book that is opening a lot of eyes. The book is called Of Boys and Men. It says why the modern male is struggling, why it matters, and what to do about it. Because of the topic, he was invited to speak at BYU at what's called the Wheatley Institute. Well, when he was visiting Utah, church leaders asked if they could meet with him. So I was in a meeting in the church administration building with members of the missionary department, with people from church education. I mean, we're worried about young men in seminaries, in institutes, in missions. There were also several of the apostles who were at the meeting and the entire young men general presidency. He reviewed what he talks about in his book. He says, this is a scary time. I mean, when was the last time you walked through a school and saw a poster that said boy power? When was the last time you walked through a school and saw a poster that said scholarship night for boys? He pointed out that we're at a really scary time. And he said, the young men of the world have lost their script. He said, the script for boys used to be, you've got to do well in school so that you can get a good job so that you can raise a family. He said, now that's the girls' script. That's the script the girls are following. I got to do well in school so I can get a good job so I can raise a family. He said, the boys have lost their script. He said, so we have young men in their 30s who are still living in their mother's basement playing video games and watching porn. He says, the boys have lost their script. I spoke up and I gave him a copy of the Aaronic Priesthood Quorum theme. And he read it silently to himself. The theme starts, I am a beloved son of God, and he has a work for me to do. It talks about, I will prepare to become a diligent missionary, loyal husband, and loving father by being a true disciple of Jesus Christ. I will help prepare the world for the Savior's return by inviting all to come unto Christ and receive the blessings of his atonement. Man, when Richard Reeves finished reading that, he looked up and he said, if every young man in the world had this script and followed this script, the crisis would be over. We have the script that the world needs. And our young men are internalizing it. They're reciting it almost every week. This is the script that will help them stand up and reject the harmful masculinity of the world and accept the divine masculinity of Jesus Christ and his prophets. This is the script that's going to allow them to be different enough from the world that they can make that difference in the world. This script doesn't take one thing away from women who also must lift themselves and reach their potential. We don't have to choose. Do we want young men to develop, or do we want young women to develop? We have young women who recite a young women theme, and we have young men who recite an Aaronic priesthood quorum theme. And both of them are seeing a script, a way forward in a world that is so unsure about what the future is or should be or can be. We have direction.
Thank you, Brother Wilcox. I don't think I could add anything more to that. You've certainly answered a lot of questions that I've had burning in my heart as well. You know, I try to represent interesting questions and questions that people would like to listen to the answer to. But of course, I come personally as well with questions of the soul. And I appreciate that response. And I appreciate so much you being so generous with your time and sharing today and taking some time out of what I know is such a busy schedule to speak with me. And I apologize that I look like I'm in a very dark place. My backlight went out halfway through.
That's
just
funny.
Explain that. I look like I'm in Darth Vader's.
Well, I've just got a lot of books behind me.
But thank you so much, Brother Wilcox.
Thank you, Ben. I mean it when I say that I admire what you're doing. Thank you for having the courage to stand up and be counted. Thank you for having the courage to let people know that you are a Christian and let people know that we do have answers to perplexing questions and help people understand that our youth are not running down. Our youth are doing everything they can to move in a positive direction. You've seen that in the UK with the youth you work with. I've seen it all over the world. And so whenever I get discouraged about the future, I just think of young Latter-day Saints all over the world attending FSYs and singing, "We are as the army of Helaman." And then that fills me with hope. I think of young people who are going to gather all over the world on October 22nd. By the way, if this is broadcast before October 22nd, I hope people will mark their calendars, because that will be the first ever worldwide youth testimony meeting. At 7:00 p.m., wherever they are, youth are to gather in their branches, their wards, their stakes, however the local units decide to do it. And if they all have a testimony meeting at 7:00, it will be started by President Nelson, who will bear his testimony in a video. President Lund of the young men, President Freeman, from the young women, will bear their testimonies. And then locally, we will have the youth stand and bear testimony. And as everyone does it at the same time, then we will literally, as the time zones progress, we will have 24 hours of youth standing up and testifying of Jesus Christ. And when I think about that, I am filled with nothing but hope for the future.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for watching For All the Saints. This show needs your help to grow. Please like the video, comment your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone you think would enjoy it. Thank you.